the hidden Jewish network that built Malaysia's economy. Imagine if the real money in Malaysia was designed to stay invisible. You won't find these names plastered on skyscrapers or taught in history books. They hid behind a wall of loyalty, silence, and fear. Way before Kuala Lumpur turned into a city of glass, a shadow system was already running the show, controlling land, cash, and trade. At the core of this system stood a tight circle of elite dynasties. We are talking about families that quietly steered the country's economic future while remaining practically ghosts to the general public. Back in the colonial days, real power didn't sit in government buildings. It lived in private living rooms, handwritten notebooks, and handshake deals. Being a wealthy family meant more than just having a big bank account. It meant discipline, strategy, and blood loyalty. Who needs a contract when you have trust? Word traveled way faster in these circles than through any official channel. Tin and rubber weren't just resources to sell, they were leverage. If you controlled the goods, you owned the future. Penang was the headquarters for this underground world. Ships docked, cash flowed, and entire neighborhoods got built without a single public debate. Rival clans went at it hard, but they kept it quiet. You didn't sign a partnership, you married into it. Cross them and they would hold a grudge for generations. To the average person on the street, they looked like regular merchants. In reality, every family ran like a private empire, looking out for number one. Then World War II hit. The occupation and the political chaos that followed smashed this secret order to pieces. Some clans got out with their fortunes safe, others made one wrong move and vanished. By the time Malaysia stepped into independence, the economic groundwork had already been laid behind locked doors. The names dropped off the map, street signs got changed, the records went dark, but the framework they built, it is still holding up modern Malaysia today, invisible but totally real. Power doesn't just go away, it just gets better at hiding. Before we dive deeper, let me know where you are tuning in from. If you are in Malaysia, comment 1. If you are in the United States, comment 2. Anywhere else, comment 3. And make sure to hit subscribe if you are ready to see how these empires protected their legacy. To get how these hidden elites made it to the top, you have to understand their timing. They moved before anyone else even flinched. Long before independence, before flags or borders meant anything, business was king. Ports like Penang were not just for trading, they were arenas. Ambition separated the survivors from the failures. In that environment, you didn't wait for a lucky break. You made one yourself. These folks showed up with more than just capital. They brought history. After generations of shipping goods through chaotic regions, they knew one rule: never trust a single system. While the colonial bosses worried about law and order, these families focused on relationships. They invested in people before assets, locking down loyalty across every race, religion, and political line. That flexibility made them untouchable. Malaysia's resources were their weapon of choice. Tin, rubber, shipping lanes, credit lines, it was all quietly scooped up by a few trusted networks. Sure, competition existed, but it followed a code. Making a scene was dangerous. Instead of public fights, rival families battled through price wars and exclusive access. One slip-up could destroy decades of hustle. One smart partnership could double a fortune overnight. The difference between these dynasties and your average shopkeeper was restraint. They knew when to pump the brakes, when to fade into the background, and when to let someone else take the credit. Wealth wasn't just about the money, it was about staying safe. Their kids weren't raised to be flashy, they were trained to keep their mouths shut. As Malaysia modernized, people assumed these old clans lost their grip. Wrong. They just evolved. The paperwork changed, and the names disappeared from the documents, but the control remained. The same old playbook kept quietly steering banks, real estate, and major industries long after the founders were gone. That was not luck. It was by design. As independence got closer, the pressure cooker started to heat up. New laws, new players, and rising nationalism threatened the status quo. For the elite, staying alive meant turning invisible. You could not look like the boss anymore. Power had to be spread out on paper, even if it stayed concentrated in reality. This era forced some tough calls. Some families split their assets among cousins, in-laws, or silent partners to hide the paper trail. Others moved cash offshore while keeping their influence anchored in Malaysia. The best move? Break it up without losing the reins. They learned how to look like average citizens while still calling the shots. Penang and Kuala Lumpur were the laboratories for this transformation. Massive businesses that used to run under one name suddenly split into unrelated companies. Supply chains got murky, ownership got blurry. What looked like competition on the outside was actually coordination on the inside. They knew political safety meant looking neutral. Public loyalty was trash. Private access was gold. It was not all smooth sailing inside the house, though. As the money piled up, so did the tension between generations. The younger heirs questioned the secrecy, while the elders warned that showing off would get them destroyed. Some families fractured for good. Others clamped down, choosing unity over ambition. Every dynasty faced the same choice: get big and loud or stay quiet and survive. Malaysia's rapid development rewarded the patient ones. Infrastructure projects, real estate booms, and industrial growth opened up new lanes for influence. The families that made it were not always the richest, but they were the most disciplined. They took slower growth if it meant staying in the game longer. By the time the new economy kicked into gear, the board looked different. New names, modern structures. But the foundation? Rock solid. The same hidden forces were still moving pieces below the surface, driven by choices made when silence was worth more than speed. Malaysia's industrial rise looked open and free, but that was just an illusion. Behind the headlines, the gates were still locked. Government contracts, zoning deals, and infrastructure projects flowed through channels most outsiders didn't understand. The survivors of the old guard had a new challenge: how to pull the strings without looking like the leader. Being seen was a liability. This era belonged to the middlemen. Lawyers, local partners, and offshore accounts became the ultimate shields. The big families stopped signing their own deals. Decisions were filtered through layers designed to soak up the heat. To the public, they looked scattered. In private, they were tighter than ever. Every move was weighed against political risk. Kuala Lumpur became the new center of gravity. As the capital expanded, real estate became the safest currency of influence. The ownership webs got complicated: buildings owned by trusts, trusts by companies, and companies by nominees. The goal was simple: control without fingerprints. One family could influence a whole district and not appear on a single deed. Relationships were worth more than the wealth itself. They cultivated access to decision-makers for decades. Favors were never written down. Loyalty got tested when things went south. If you failed, you were cut off for good. This system kept things stable for the insiders and confusing for everyone else. What set Malaysia apart was the balancing act. These families learned to live with new governments, shifting regulations, and public eyes. They did not fight change, they absorbed it. Adaptation became their superpower. By the time the new wave of entrepreneurs showed up, the game was already rigged. Sure, there were opportunities, but the lanes were narrow. The rules were invisible but strictly enforced. Power hadn't vanished, it just learned to speak in a whisper. As Malaysia hit a new growth spurt, the script flipped again. Globalization opened doors but exposed cracks in the armor. Foreign investors came in hot with cash, thinking money could unlock anything. They found out fast that the economy still moved to an old rhythm. The elite families didn't compete in the open. They positioned themselves right where the influence quietly came together. This period showed the real strength of those legacy networks. While big multinationals chased quarterly profits, the old guard played the long game. They focused on boring stuff like logistics, property development, and private finance because it rewarded patience. They knew that controlling the flow of goods was way more powerful than actually making them. You control the access, you control the outcome. The tension between tradition and the modern world started to grow. Younger members came back from Western colleges with new ideas, wanting to scale fast and look global. The elders pushed back. They had seen how visibility destroys empires. The internal debates were intense, sometimes brutal. In several cases, family councils blew up, splitting the assets and weakening their grip. The ones that made it kept the discipline, choosing caution over speed. They accepted limits to stay safe. Malaysia's multicultural vibe played a huge part, too. The smart elites built bridges across communities not because of ideology, but out of necessity. Business partnerships crossed ethnic lines to create layers of protection. These weren't emotional friendships. They were strategic moves designed to outlast elections and policy changes. By the time Malaysia cemented its spot as a regional powerhouse, the real winners weren't the ones making the most noise. They weren't the flashy disruptors or the speed demon builders. The trophy went to the guys who understood the art of keeping their mouths shut and waiting for the right moment. Real wealth didn't shout. It dug in. When the country fully plugged into the global economy, the old dynasties had already thrown out the rulebook. It wasn't about owning the whole pie anymore. It was about where you sat at the table. Families that used to run the docks and pack the warehouses pivoted to advisory seats, minority shares, and calculated silence. They stopped chasing visibility and started chasing leverage. Opening up the financial markets brought new toys, but it also brought new traps. Currency crashes and overnight policy flip-flops crushed anyone trying to sprint. But the families with long memories, they played defense. They spread their bets quietly, parking cash in industries that looked totally random to the average Joe. Inside the circle, though, it was a master plan. To them, market chaos wasn't a threat, it was a clearance sale. The Asian financial crisis was the ultimate reality check on who actually held the reins. A lot of the new money got wiped out by debt. The old guard just stepped back, sat on their cash, and waited for the dust to settle. Some used proxies to scoop up distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. Others just held the line. Survival wasn't about growth. It was about having the discipline to do absolutely nothing until the time was right. That era changed the face of leadership too. The rockstar CEO was out, the boring committee was in. Things moved slower, sure, but unforced errors virtually disappeared. You didn't get power by being ambitious. You got it by having good judgment. The younger generation was told to innovate, but only inside a very tight sandbox. The name of the game was staying power, not world domination. Malaysia kept growing, but the undercurrents remained exactly the same. The rules of access, trust, and consequences hadn't budged. Markets got smarter, tech got faster, but influence still belonged to the people who knew how to keep a secret and play the long game. What looked like forward momentum was often just self-preservation in disguise. As a fresh generation came up, the battlefield changed shape. Smartphone cameras, social media, and the internet made the old stay silent strategy a lot harder to pull off. Gossip traveled faster than loyalty ever could. Your reputation could be torched in an afternoon. For the established elite, this was a minefield. Managing the family brand became just as critical as managing the family bank account. Some dealt with it by vanishing. They buried ownership layers deep and moved decision-making offshore. Influence wasn't direct anymore. It was filtered through consultants, hedge funds, and middlemen. You didn't need to be in the room to run the show. Ghosting became a strategy. The less people knew, the safer the fortune. Others went the other way and got burned. A few families tried to play the celebrity game, branding themselves as modern tycoons. But cameras bring scrutiny. Regulators started sniffing around. Competitors took notes. In some cases, decades of careful positioning fell apart in a couple of years. The takeaway was brutal. In Malaysia, you get rewarded for being boring, not for showing off. Passing the torch became the biggest headache. Founders who had navigated wars and economic depressions found it tough to teach their kids the value of restraint. Money without discipline is a ticking time bomb. So, the internal rules got stricter. They wrote family constitutions and capped voting rights. The dynasties that lasted treated corporate governance like boot camp. Look behind the modern skyscrapers, and those quiet adjustments are still happening. Startups blow up and fade away. The news cycle spins. But the foundation stays rock solid, guarded by people who know that real power doesn't need an audience. It waits, it watches, and it only strikes when it has to. This wasn't about living in the past, it was about survival of the fittest. By this point, the elite structure in Malaysia was practically invisible to the naked eye, but internally, it was locked down tight. Long-term influence wasn't fueled by cash, it ran on institutional memory. Elders passed down the kind of intel you don't find in annual reports, which handshakes were real, which names opened doors, and when to sit on your hands instead of making a move. That whisper network was worth more than an MBA. Crises kept testing the system. Political shakeups, new regulations, public scandals, they were all shock tests. And every time, the results were the same. The hotheads lost ground. The patient players gained leverage. The smart families treated every crisis like a filter that separated the people who knew the rules from the people who just got lucky. Malaysia's spot as a regional hub just cranked up the stakes. Money flowed through the country, but the control valves were selective. If you wanted land deals, permits, or the right partners, you needed a reputation built over 40 years, not 4. Trust was a cumulative score. One screw-up could wipe out a lifetime of goodwill. That fear kept the insiders in line. The difference between a dynasty that lasts and one that fades is usually humility. The strongest families accepted that being number one puts a target on your back. They chose influence over ownership, longevity over quarterly growth. They learned to step out of the spotlight publicly while still pulling the strings privately. When new players hit the Malaysian economy, a lot of them thought history was irrelevant. They were wrong. The structure hadn't disappeared, it had just grown up, and it still paid dividends to the people who respected its unwritten logic. Entering the modern era, the footprint of these legacy families got harder to track but way deeper. Power didn't flow through a famous last name or a building with their sign on it anymore. It moved through systems, governance boards, advisory councils, and quiet vetoes. You didn't need to own the whole company. You just needed to influence the 3 decisions that actually mattered. Welcome to the age of institutional camouflage. Funds replaced family firms. Boards replaced patriarchs. Decisions looked democratic, even if the outcome was predetermined. A wealthy family might only hold a minority stake, but their history and connections gave them outsized swing. Outsiders saw a mess of complexity. Insiders saw a well-oiled machine. The regulatory game was a huge part of this. Laws changed all the time, but enforcement was flexible. The veterans knew how to navigate the gray areas without picking a fight. You rarely saw a powerful family sue the government. Instead, they saw the changes coming and adjusted their sails before the storm hit. Why react when you can prepare? This period also showed that money means nothing without context. Tech bros and global investors made fortunes overnight, but they hit a wall when they tried to break into Malaysia's deep networks. Cash opens the door, but it doesn't let you stay the night. Without trust, access is temporary. The old guard knew that legitimacy is a slow-cook recipe. What stuck was a mindset forged in the fire. Patience beat expansion. Coordination beat competition. Silence beat celebration. The families that survived into this era did it by mastering the art of absence, letting someone else look like the boss while they kept the real control below the deck. By now, the system ran on autopilot. It didn't need a specific person. It relied on inherited judgment. Malaysia had changed, sure, but the architecture of power evolved right alongside it. It wasn't a dinosaur. It was a living, breathing thing, still shaping outcomes quietly, precisely, and without a round of applause. When you zoom out and look at the whole story, one truth hits you hard. Money alone never bought lasting power. Strategy did. Discipline did. Memory did. Every dynasty that made it across generations figured this out early. They learned that cash is loud, but structure is quiet, and quiet has a longer shelf life. The real lesson here isn't about being secretive for the hell of it. It's about responsibility. Surviving families learn restraint. They get that influence has ripple effects on their communities, their workers, and their kids. The strongest dynasties weren't just greedy. They felt an obligation to protect what they built without wrecking the society that let them build it. Malaysia's experience is a masterclass for anyone trying to make it today. We obsess over speed, but patience takes the gold. We praise visibility, but discretion keeps you safe. Growth feels good, but endurance is the real power. The families that lasted didn't try to win every battle. They chose when to strike and when to wait it out. There's a human side to this too. Behind every empire were real people navigating fear, loyalty, and family drama. Some crashed because they forgot who they were. Others made it because they put unity above their own egos. The families that learned to listen to each other survived forces that would crush an individual. In a world that's getting noisier by the second, this history is a reminder that stability is built in the quiet moments. Progress doesn't have to mean destruction. You don't need to be arrogant to be rich. And you don't need to be hostile to be powerful. Malaysia's past proves that you can be ambitious while still having balance, respect, and a long-term view. If this story shifted your perspective on power, send it to someone who appreciates the deep dive over the headlines. Hit subscribe for more untold histories, and drop a comment letting us know which country or dynasty we should decode next.